Move the question be now put.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, for the call on the Part 3 of the Search and Surveillance Bill. I do feel slightly inadequate following my two learned colleagues in the legal sense, but I do have some experience in the from the member who feels inadequate all the time when he stands up and speaks. I do have some experience in the media, which has been raised by Mr Parker in an earlier contribution. Part 3 does pertain to power of officers, the obtaining of warrants and production orders when we are looking at enforcement officers dealing with relatively serious cases. Mr Chair, this is my first contribution at this committee stage, so I do want to say that while we do agree with a number of the measures taken in Part 3, it is, as Mr Goff mentioned earlier in his contribution, it is unfortunate that we haven't been able to come to an agreement on a number of the issues that we have raised, a number of the issues, concerns that we have raised, in order for us as the Labour Party to give support to this bill, in order for a bill of such significance to have widespread support across the Parliament. But as a number of our contributors have said during this debate, it is time for change in this area. The current legislation around the obtaining of search warrants for surveillance is a patchwork, and the Law Commission outlined that in its report some years ago, and it is at least a positive move that some measures have been made, although we do highlight that a number of our concerns have not been addressed, even though I understand that during the Select Committee process there were some significant changes made, and I do acknowledge the Minister and the Chair for that and his stewardship of that Law and Order Select Committee. I do want to talk about two SOPs that are pertaining to Part 3. The first one is of my colleague David Parker's, and it is an amendment to Clause 69(1)(a), and it will enforce that the Director of the Serious Fraud Office becomes an enforcement officer for the purposes of obtaining a production order. And Mr Chair, the Serious Fraud Office at the moment is an outlier in terms of how it of the powers that it has to get production orders. At the moment we do have a live case where the Serious Fraud Office did not have to go and seek permission to search the offices of the National Business Review, and a number of our contributors on this side of the House have mentioned how that is a very dangerous move when we do give an agency, a law enforcement agency, pretty much carte blanche to decide whether or not it can enforce a production order on our fourth estate. And we did highlight this in our minority report, our minority review from the Select Committee process. And I'd just like to point out that we did say that the Serious Fraud Office is currently, as I said, the only agency with the power to issue examination orders and production orders without having to seek approval from a higher power. And we do believe that in a number of instances that the Serious Fraud Office has used this power on too many occasions, and too many occasions that has been used, and that was not the intent of this Parliament for the Serious Fraud Office to take liberty to use those powers that it has to especially use it against our media. And Mr Chair, as I alerted earlier, having a free media is a very, very important part of democracy. Mr Chair, a healthy democracy absolutely relies on making sure we have a free media. I think making a power to give the Serious Fraud Office the power to compel media outlets to provide evidence, to provide documents, really goes to the core of media being able to protect their sources. Sources who give information to media, hoping that they can stay as secret as possible. I know that around this place that is very important. When we speak to the media, we want our communication with them to remain confidential. But giving the Serious Fraud Office that power to compel our media to produce documents, to produce sources to produce any other kind of technology, whether it be video or audio recordings for their purposes, really does go to the core of that main tenet of media freedom around the protection of sources. And it will be a very, very a sad day if we have people or organisations in this country who don't feel that they can go to the media to highlight issues that are worthy of the media highlighting, whether it be holding us, Mr Chair,
Chris Farfoy.
whether it be us as parliamentarians that are being put under the spotlight, or whether it be government agencies, or whether it be ACC ministers, yes, whether it be private institutions. It'll be a very sad day when we introduce or let continue legislation that allows or puts at risk that freedom for individuals or agencies to go to media to highlight things that we all would agree should not be happening. Mr Speaker, Mr Chair, we need to have confidence in our media that they can carry out their job to investigate, to expose and to make sure they can educate our communities, our society, but having this power with the Serious Fraud Office to compel them to give up any piece of documentation would be a very, very, very sad move indeed. And Mr Chair, that is one that we do not support, and that is why we do not support this legislation as it stands, and why David Parker has introduced an amendment to this Part 3 in order to see if we can do something about to remove that power that the Serious Fraud Office has on its own at the moment. The police do not have that power to go in and compel our news media to supply documents. So why do we let the Serious Fraud Office have that ability to go into an office? As I said, this isn't a live issue. With that example, with the National Business Review, to go into their offices and demand that they give up evidence. It's not to ask and then for them to have the right to silence and say no. That right will no longer be available to them, Mr Chair. They will be forced, compelled to give up that information. Mr Chair, I'd also just like to briefly touch on an SOP which Charles Chevelle has lodged, and I believe that is an amendment to clause 42AA1A, if I'm right.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come for the dinner break. This debate is suspended. I shall resume the chair at 7:30.